January 26, 1945, Holtzwihr, France. A German 2nd Mountain Division soldier observed in the window of the aid station as medics brought in the wounded. Unit had attacked with 6 tanks and 250 men against one American lieutenant, who was standing on a burning tank destroyer. The American had a single machine gun. Within an hour, the German force was whittled down to 70 fighting men. The survivors could think of nothing but the gun that had brought them to a halt. The gun was no secret wonder gun, no technological wonder conceived in the labs of Germany, but an old-fashioned American machine gun that had initially rolled off assembly lines back in 1933. And yet this gun, the Browning M250 caliber heavy machine gun, would go on most intimidating piece of artillery in the American arsenal, not due to its sophistication, but due to its cruel, merciless efficiency. The surviving Germans had just seen what would go on to be one of the most famous battles in American military history. First Lieutenant Audie Murphy, wounded and alone, had jumped onto a burning M10 tank destroyer and directed its turret-mounted 50 caliber machine gun at a whole German infantry division, company backed by armor. Murphy discharged the gun for more than an hour, with such lethal impact that the German attack just dissolved. The official Medal of Honor citation, issued by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch on June 2, 1945, verified that Murphy caused about 50 casualties among the attacking force. The 50 caliber impacts became horribly known to German medics. In contrast, rifle bullets that could injure and permit recovery, 50 caliber bullets inflicted dismal tissue destruction. The enormous kinetic energy transfer ensured that an impact to a limb often meant amputation. An impact to the body was virtually out. German field hospitals on the front lines developed to identify 50 caliber victims based on the type of wounds. There was not much that medics could do other than offer comfort and attempt to stabilize patients for evacuation. Many wounded never reached field hospitals. The medical impact extended beyond direct casualties. German units that came under sustained 50 caliber fire suffered psychological casualties, combat exhaustion, and breakdown of unit cohesion at rates higher than units that faced conventional small arms fire. Medical officers noted that soldiers who had been subjected to repeated 50 caliber attacks, even when not physical harm, displayed manifestations of extreme stress and combat exhaustion. Awareness that the following burst of fire would not be survivable in a cover location, that survival was left to chance, more than skill, generated a feeling of powerlessness that was medically and militarily important. But the Holtzwihr operation was only one incident. From Thiberkirch of Normandy to the frozen woods of the Ardennes, from the dunes of North Africa to the air over the Reich proper, German troops came to know and respect a familiar noise, the drumming, crashing roar of the M2 Browning, spewing out 450 to 575 rounds per minute. Every behemoth 50 caliber bullet with enough kinetic force to blast past light armor, RIP through concrete, and transform human bodies into nothing but unidentifiable wreckage. Their transformation from skepticism to terror had been underway 3 years before. The arithmetic of American industrial power was soon to be inscribed not in production data, but in the experience of German soldiers who had confronted this weapon and lived to describe it. What they learned would destroy their comprehension of modern warrant, expose a fundamental fact about American war doctrine. The United States had not constructed the most advanced heavy machine gun. They had constructed something much more hazardous. They had constructed the most dependable, most prevalent, and most psychological Eisener cruise-served weapon in history. The animosity started not due to fear, but due to contempt. September 6, 1943, the clouds above Stuttgart. 388 B-17 flying fortresses descended upon Germany's industrial heartland in the first major daylight attack upon the city. Luftwaffe fighter units scrambled toward. Among them were pilots who had downed dozens of Allied planes in 2 years of war. They were proud of their Fallschirmtruppe, 190 planes, each carrying for 20 cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. The German pilots rolled onto their Attic approaches from high and ahead. Standard procedure for intercepting the American heavies. At 800 meters, they opened fire. Cannons boomed, shells rushing toward the lead bombers. Then something occurred that would revolutionize German perception of air-to-air combat. The bombers burst into flames. Not the plumes of burning aircraft, but muzzle flashes. Each B-7 was equipped with 13 Browning M2 machine guns. A standard formation of 36 bombers equated to 468 heavy machine guns, all firing the same 50 caliber Browning machine gun cartridge, capable of reaching out to 1830 with fatal impact. The defensive firepower of the formation combined totaled over 6,000 rounds per minute, a wall of steel through which no fighter could penetrate safely. German fighters experienced their planes shudder from 50 caliber bullets ripping through wings, engine cowlings and canopies. They aborted attacks, making forced dives with planes smoking and hydraulic fluid leaking. Third took its toll on the Luftwaffe. 45 B-17s were destroyed, but German fighter losses were disastrous for those units that no longer had the luxury of replacing veteran pilots. What the German airmen did not yet realize was that they were facing not only a weapon, but a war philosophy. The Americans had resolved the issue of bomber defense, not by way of technological progress, but by way of sheer volume of firepower. Every B-17G carried between 5,000 and 7,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, spread over 13 gun stations, with some units supplementing ammunition beyond requisites. Luftwaffe airmen had learned to be wary of 20mm and 30mm cannons, because those guns could obliterate a bomber with the first round fired in exactly the right spot. They had learned to be afraid of the explosive rounds that would initiate upon impact. But the American 50 caliber did not explode. It did not have the enormous half-in-diameter projectile, weighing 707 grains, at 2,900 feet purse, with 12,000 feet lb of muzzle energy, merely pierced holes in everything it struck. Wings, engines, fuel tanks, pilots. By October 1943, the Luftwaffe fighter units had come to realize the extent of the peril. Oberst Heinrich Wormhiller, with 93 victories, wrote of the American bomber formations in a letter to his relatives. To strike the Americans is to fly through a steel storm. You see the tracers, 1 in 5, and you realize that for each tracer you see, 4 unseen bullets are whizzing by. When you close to effective cannon range, you are already within their kill zone. The Germans modified their tactics. They attempted head-on attacks, diving from on top, climbing from the bottom, attacking from the sides. Nothing worked regularly. The American gunners enjoyed overlapping fields of fire. If you were coming in from the front, the top turret and nose guns would get you. From the rear, the tail guns and ball turret. From the sides, the waist guns. From above or below, the top turret and ball turret. There was no safe entry. The United States Army Air Forces had positioned their combat box formations of 21 aircraft in three-dimensional space, specifically to overlap maximum fields of defensive fire. But the true horror was not so much the amount of fire. It was its reliability. German pilots flying the Me-109 or F-190 knew their cannons would jam, particularly in cold air high up. The German MG-13113mm machine gun was more reliable, but even so needed careful maintenance and would fail at the critical moment. The American Browning M2, on the other hand, simply functioned. It sprayed out bullets hour after hour. It functioned in temperatures between 40 and plus 40 C. It continued to work after bung, struck by German cannon shells. It continued to fire even when the barrels glowed red because of continuous firing. American maintenance troops would swap overheated barrels within minutes, not hours, and the weapon would continue to fire without skipping a beat. Lieutenant Wolf, Gang Fischer, a pilot in a J-88 squadron that conducted bomber intercept missions within the Reich, lived to provide testimony at the post-war Luftwaffe debrief. His words, taken in March 1946, reflected the increasing awareness of German aircrew. We referred to American bomber squadrons as Die Fliegenden and Versungen, the flying fortresses. But what made them fortresses was not armor or discipline in formation flying. It was those 50 caliber machine guns that never wavered, never jammed, never gave us a break. We lost too many pilots. Not to American aircraft, but to the bomber defensive fire. It was as if flying into a meat grinder. The ground fight told the same tale with different details. June 6, 1944, Normandy. Oberst Hans von Luck led units of the 21st Panzer Division, defending against the Allied invasion. Von Luck was not your typical officer. He'd fought at El Alamein, won the Knight's Cross, and would eventually release his highly rated memoir, Panzer Commander. His division was among the first German units to be up against American forces in protracted ground combat. What von Luck learned was that American doctrine had put the 50 caliber machine gun on practically every fighting vehicle. Jeeps mounted them, trucks mounted them, half-tracks mounted them, tanks mounted them atop turret hoods, tank destroyers fitted them, even supply trucks carried them for convoy defense. The Americans had done what the Germans never had: universal heavy machine gun defense throughout their entire force structure. Von Luck described in his memoir the tactical consequence. We had been promised ore training, and our tactical principle would prevail despite American material superiority. At Normandy, I discovered the truth. The Americans did not require better tactics. They had sufficient ammunition to make errors and still emerge victorious. Their 50 caliber machine guns were on every vehicle, every location, firing all the time. We could not move in daylight. Any attempt to maneuver brought instant and swamping fire. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical losses. The German army had constructed its infantry doctrine upon the machine gun. The MG-34 and later the MG-42 were superb weapons. The MG-42 could shoot 1,200 rounds per minute and gained the nickname Hitler's buzzsaw. Among Allied troops were able to hear its sound. The German platoons had 1,800 rounds per machine gun and structured their style of warfare with the purpose of supporting the gun team. The idea of using Einheitsmaschine and Go or Generalpurpose machine gun would eventually be followed by NATO forces, as it was strategically feasible. But the Germans had never dreamed of the extent of American 50 caliber use. An entire American armed division moving through France would have 100 or more 50 caliber machine guns on vehicles. American supply convoys employed a known pattern of alternate fire, one vehicle firing right, one firing left to both cover the flanks and interrupt German ambushes. This tactic was particularly effective against Panzer FA units attempting to engage American armor close-up. American armored columns utilized what they referred to as reconnaissance by fire. Instead of moving cautiously and waiting for the enemy to give away positions, American units would keep a steady stream of 50 caliber machine gun fire going into any potential hiding spot. Tree lines, farmhouses, stone walls, hedge. The amount of fire would either discourage concealed German positions or invite counterfire that gave away their positions. This tactic, recorded for and wide in primary sources such as Tank Doctrine from Normandy to Lorraine by Roman Jerimoich, pushed German troops into distraction. Veterans of the German infantry on the Eastern Front believed they had seen the worst of industrial war against the Soviets. Then they faced American firepower doctrine in France. Survivors of the Normandy fighting German squad leaders who were captured and survived the combat explained the difference in their debriefing script in the United States. Army Historical Division documents: we encountered Russian human wave attacks and artillery barges. We encountered machine gun fire that never ceased from the Americans. They shot at nothing. They shot to keep us with our heads down. They shot to keep us from moving. They shot because they were not limited by ammunition, and we were. After 2 weeks of battling the Americans in the B-cage, soldiers wouldn't venture out from behind cover in daylight. It wasn't cowardice, it was math. Movement was death. The M16 multiple gun motor carriage showed American firepower philosophy in its most absolute form. This was a half-track with 450 caliber machine guns in a powered turret built for anti-air defense. The combined fire rate approached 2,200 rounds per minute. American soldiers nicknamed it the meat chopper or the kraut mower. Official 473rd AAA Battalion reports in November 1944 claimed that the main mission of the M16 half-track anti-aircraft ended up becoming its secondary mission, and it was used instead against ground forces. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe had been substantially defeated across Western Europe. American anti-aircraft units were being redirected for ground support operations. The M16 was devastatingly effective against German infantry and light vehicles. At the Battle of the Bulge, when the Germans launched their final large-scale offensive in the West between December 16, 1944 and January 25, 1945, M16 units were responsible for disrupting many German infantry attacks merely crossing their 4-gun mounts over attacking formations. The experience of German forces trying to lay in wait in ambush of American supply convoys shows why the 50 caliber became so despised. German doctrine for convoy ambush recommended allowing the front vehicles to pass, then blowing up vehicles in the middle of the column to form a roadblock, then methodically blowing up the pinned convoy. The strategy had proved effective against British and Soviet supply lines throughout the war. Against American convoys, however, the strategy catastrophically failed. American convoy philosophy positioned 50 caliber equipped vehicles at intervals along the column. When an ambush was begun, American units would respond fire with their 50 calibers at once, while other units moved to flank the ambush site. The intensity of return fire was so heavy that German ambush groups often took more casualties than the convoys they attacked. German platoon commanders involved in convoy ambushes during the battle in France told about the development of German tactics and the ultimate failure of the Germans in post-war interrogations. In earlier ambushes, German troops placed infantry armed with machine guns and panzerasts on roadsides. American convoys had 50 caliber machine-gunned vehicles spread out among them. The intensity of the return fire from the convoys was terrible. German forces realized to ambush only single cars, never convoys, but single cars were not common. The Americans operated in numbers exactly because they knew that German troops could not successfully attack their convoys. The alternate fire that American convoys used was especially effective. Cars on the right-hand side of the road would shoot into the right flank. Cars on the left would shoot left. This created interlocking fields of fire that covered both sides of the road at once. German forces trying to ambush from one side would be in a position to be fired at, not just from the one side of the convoy, but from the other side as well. The psychological impact of being fired at from all directions by weapons that could penetrate, cover, and had seemingly endless ammunition made successful ambushes all but impossible. American logistics units knew that the 50 caliber machine gun was their best defense. Drivers and assistant drivers were trained on weapons. Ammunition was loaded in large excess over a few. Commanders of convoys were empowered to attack any suspected threat with instant and superior firepower. The consequence was that German forces, by mid to late 1944, had all but abandoned trying to interdict American lines of supply, where American forces enjoyed air superiority and adequate ground combat resources to react to threats. This had strategic connotations outside the immediate tactical context. German troops in France, and subsequently in Germany proper, were not able to effectively disrupt American supply lines. American forces could rely on constant resupplying of ammunition, fuel, food, and equipment. This allowed American tactical operations to presuppose that firepower would be available at the time it was needed. German planning, in contrast, had to factor in perennial shortages of ammunition, fuel, and the fact that any available supplies would arrive late and in inadequate numbers. The 50 caliber Aachen gun was a cause as well as a symptom of American logistical dominance. It worked because American industry could make ammunition in massive quantities. It allowed operations to continue because its reliability ensured that once delivered, ammunition would be used effectively. German troops observing American tracer rounds, tracing across the battlefield under the cover of night, realized they were witnessing not only ammunition spending but the tangible evidence of an industrial capability they were unable to match. The aerial terror brought a new level of German fear of the 50 caliber. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, American pilots affectionately nicknamed the Jug, had 8 Browning M2 machine guns mounted in its wings. This gave one fighter the ability to unleash 4,400 rounds per minute of cumulative firepower on strafing runs. German troops came to identify the characteristic silhouette of the P-47 and the whistle preceding death. A flight of 4 P-47s on a strafing run meant 3250 caliber machine guns focusing in on an area target. The planes would come in low and fast, sometimes giving little. Pilots would begin firing at distances of 600 to 800 meters and walk their fire over German lines, vehicles, and troop formations. The impact was accounted for by survivors, a horizontal rain of metal that destroyed everything. Surviving German supply sergeants that went through several attacks on the retreat from Normandy in August 1944 explained thepilessness German ground forces experienced against American aerial power in their testimonies. You hear the engines first. When you do look up, they are already shooting. The bullets strike the road, the cars, the men, simultaneously. There is no cover that is any good. Walls of stone fall, trees are felled, metal rends like paper. You can be sheltered behind a truck one minute, and the truck the next, only pieces of metal and flames. Troops learned to ditch vehicles the instant they heard the roar of aircraft engines. Worth losing the vehicle, rather than the vehicle and the crew. The P-47 was especially useful in what American flyers referred to as armed reconnaissance missions. Instead of targeting specific targets, flights would patrol assigned areas for targets of opportunity. Any German vehicle on the move during the day was at risk. Any column of troops, any supply convoy, any gun position. The 850 caliber machine guns provided pilots with sufficient ammunition to take out multiple targets on a single sortie. A pilot might strafe a convoy, go to altitude, sight a German tank platoon, dive and attack them, then strafe a crossroads on the way back. The ammunition load, about 425 rounds per gun, was 3,400 rounds in total, sufficient for prolonged combat. German forces responded by moving mainly at night and in foul weather, but this response was at colossal expense of operational tempo and logistics. Supplies that would have taken hours to transport took days. Reinforcements were late or did not arrive. The Luftwaffe's failure to challenge American air superiority through mid-1944 left German ground forces under the constant threat of aerial attack, and the main weapon that delivered that threat was the 50 caliber machine gun. The synergy of ground-mounted and delivered 50 caliber fire produced a total suppression effect. German units were not able to move during daylight due to strafing attacks. They were not able to move at night due to American ground forces employing reconnaissance by fire with 50 calibers mounted on vehicles in order to interdict roads and trails. They were not able to mass forces for counterattacks because American doctrine requested immediate engagement of any German formation seen with all firepower available, such as 50 caliber machine guns capable of firing sustained bursts while other guns were being brought to bear. This was the reality that shattered German combat strength in the West. Not a single climactic battle, not a wonder weapon, but the sheer force of having to confront an enemy whose standard heavy machine gun was available in suck-breathtaking numbers and used so generously that conventional military reactions became German tactical doctrine, German training, German fighting spirit. None of these things could overcome the mere mathematical fact that American troops could bring greater air power to any position on the battlefield in less time than German troops could react. A German battalion attacking an American position might encounter 50 to 150 caliber machine guns, all firing instantly ill-equipped with thousands of rounds of ammunition. German doctrine emphasized cautious fire discipline to save ammunition. American doctrine emphasized massive amounts of fire to defeat the enemy and control initiative. When these two mindsets came into conflict, American material superiority was the key. Urban fighting unfolded a new level of 50 caliber effectiveness. With American forces clearing through French cities and German towns, the 50 caliber was extremely useful for inhibiting enemy positions on the second story of buildings and for destroying masonry structures. The huge projectile could puncture several walls of common European construction. Masonry that would have halted rifle fire and machine gun fire gave little protection against 50 caliber rounds. American tank commanders soon learned to employ their turret-mounted 50 calibers to suppress second-story windows and rooftop positions before advancing through cities. The method was straightforward but wickedly effective. A tank would stop at an intersection, and the commander would walk the 50 caliber over building facades, firing regularly at whatever likely position. The Klossen fire would pin down German defenders, giving infantry an opportunity to move forward. The tank would advance and do the same thing at the next intersection. German panzer teams, which were quite effective at open country and especially lethal in urban settings where they could attack armor close up, found themselves unable to operate effectively against American combined arms tactics that combined 50 caliber suppressive fire. A Panzerfaust operator had to risk exposure to aim and shoot his weapon. American tactics dictated sustained 50 caliber fire on any suspected location. The combination made successful Panzerrast attacks the exception in cases when American troops utilized correct combined arms coordination. German company commanders, who battled American troops in the Rhinen towards the end of the war, explained the impossibility of successful defense in urban warfare against American methods in post-statements. German infantry would take position in top-story rooms with good fields of fire. American tanks would advance and blow the buildings apart with 50 caliber and tank main arm fire. The 50 caliber bullets would penetrate walls and ceilings. There was no place to attack from behind. Soldiers would take cover behind furniture or interior walls, and the bullets would catch up to them anyway. The only way to live was to leave positions prior to the Americans putting all their fire on a position. Abandoning positions, however, cost ground, and there was no ground left with their tails between their legs. The psychological effect of battle in city streets against honor pennant with inexhaustible 50 caliber ammo was immense. German troops knew rationally that walls and buildings offered cover but not concealment from 50 caliber fire. Psychologically, the human instinct to find shelter behind solid objects was immense. Seeing 50 caliber rounds blow through meter-thick stone walls and keep on going through several rooms obliterated the psychological comfort that shelter usually supplied. Troops were exposed even when they were concealed, vulnerable even when sheltered by what should usually have been sufficient cover. This psychological weakening had the effect of snowballing. A soldier may live through one encounter, a second, but every time seeing 50 caliber fire wreck what should have been secure cover. Finally, the compounded stress of realizing that no position was ever fully secure, that the Americans could and would reduce any defensive position to rubble with prolonged firing. Shattered combat effectiveness. Units would leave positions without being attacked directly because they knew that American firepower would ultimately render such positions untenable. The last campaigns in Germany showed the absolute superiority of American firepower doctrine. German troops fought with valor and ability, frequently winning local tactical victories against locally superior American forces. But tactical sex was meaningless when American forces could simply concentrate firepower and level German positions to the 50 caliber machine gun formed the basis for this firepower. It was available in large numbers. Tongage any target. It was durable enough to fire for hours on end. It was equipped with enough ammunition that American commanders never did have to run, and it was used by doctrine that prized suppression and destruction over conservation and accuracy. German tank crews came to dread the 50 caliber for various reasons. Although the M2 was unable to penetrate German medium and heavy tank frontal armor, it could knock out optical equipment, incapacitate external stowage, and pin down accompanying infantry. Perhaps more importantly, the 50 caliber would penetrate the thinner side and rear armor of most German armored vehicles at combat ranges. American M10 tank destroyers mounted a 50 caliber M2HB machine gun placed on the back of the turret to provide anti-air defense and protection against close infantry. Statistical data analysis of ammunition spending reveals M10s produced much higher ratios of high explosive rounds to armor-piercing rounds, suggesting widespread use in infantry support missions, where the 50 caliber was instrumental in what crews referred to as cleanup missions in close combat. A German Panzer unit may knock out an American tank, then be destroyed by 50 caliber fire from supporting tank destroyers or infantry gun vehicles before they could. Night fighting brought forth yet another horror connected to the 50 caliber. American ammunition employed Aeon tracer round 2 4-ball rounds ratio. This resulted in every fifth 50 caliber bullet apparent to the Germans being a radiant tracer that indicated the path of the burst. German troops seeing American 50 caliber fire at night could watch the tracers arcing towards them. Streams of light that looked slow enough to follow visually, but which arrived with killing speed and impact. The psychological impact was deep. The troops could watch death coming. They could observe the tracers closing in on their location. They understood that for each tracer they observed, 4 more rounds were traveling in the same trajectory. The human reflex to duck or dodge didn't matter, because soldiers already saw the tracer by the time the rounds arrived. Veterans trained not to watch the tracers, but new replacements would stare at them, captivated by the deadly light, dysplamony, times freezing outdoors until the fire located them. American troops took advantage of this psychological impact intentionally. Nighttime reconnaissance by fire involved laying down strings of tracer-loaded 50 caliber fire over suspected locations. The effect on the eyes was large areas would be filled with crossing streams of tracers. The sound of the shooting, coupled with the visual impact, created an atmosphere that German troops called hellish. German infantry squad leaders captured in October 1944 near Aachen told about the experience in their interrogations. At night, one can see them firing even when they can't see you. They shoot at sounds, at movement, at nothing. The tracers indicate to you where death is headed, and you can't get away. You see the streams of fire and recognize that behind Each tracer are 4 additional bullets. You figure one gun firing for 10 seconds sends 50 rounds your way, and only 10 are tracers. You see 10 flashes of light, and number 40 more rounds are airborne. Then you figure there are not 1 but 5 or 10 guns blazing away. The math of it is, you can't live through that much fire by skill or guts. You exist by chance only. The Germans used their own tracer rounds, but they had a doctrine of fire discipline that limiteth use of tracers. A German machine gunner might fire a burst with tracers to check their point of aim, then convert to ball rounds to save the more costly tracer rounds. American gun crews fired mixed belts non-stop. The eye candy, effective American firepower at night, was thus far more spectacular than German. Even if German guns fired more tracers per minute, this visual superiority had functional consequences as well as intimidation. American fire commanders could see their own fire and modify it in real time. If tracers were short of a target, the gunner would be able to see this and make the necessary adjustments immediately. German counterfire was more difficult to observe, since they fired fewer tracers. American troops thus received superior real-time information about the effectiveness of their fire, which enabled them to adjust and focus fire better than German troops could with their more cautious utilization of tracer. The Germans attempted to create countermeasures. They attempted to employ them more aggressively in order to close with American positions prior to the 50 caliber fire becoming overwhelming. This seldom worked because American air cover and artillery would engage German tanks at longer ranges, compelling the Germans to fight at precisely the ranges where 50 caliber fire could be most effective. They attempted to use infiltration tactics, advancing under cover of night and in inclement weather when American visibility was, but American logistics assured a constant supply of 50 caliber ammunition, and the American doctrine involved firing on any suspected position irrespective of whether their targets had been verified. July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra. The breakout of the Americans from Normandy started with 3,300 tons of bombs released by 1,800 heavy bombers against German positions around Panzer Division, one of the first-class German divisions defending the area, was commanded by Generalleutnant Fritz Bayerlein. Wrote elaborate manuscripts on the United States Army Historical Division after the war, interpreting the campaign. His analysis of American firepower was clinical and crushing. He explained that by the time his division had withdrawn from the St. Lo sector, it had been annihilated not so much by bombing or although those were considerable factors, but by the cumulative effect of incessant Smallam's fire, which refused his troops room to maneuver. American 50 caliber machine guns on all his vehicles ensured that his troops were unable to move to counter any American advances without being attacked as soon as they moved. His conclusion was that Americans had cracked the problem of modern warfare. They had discovered the means of projecting superior firepower without the need for superior training or tactics. Berlin to Generalleutnant on July 20, 1944, engaged in the thickism to Battle of the Bulge, and eventually capitulated in April 1945. His post-war works would prove to be significant sources for the of German viewpoints on American combat tactics. He wrote again and again that the 50 caliber machine gun, manned by troops with little training and endowed with enormous amounts of ammunition, provided a standard of firepower that German forces could not equal. The German, more advanced weapons and better trained men. Winter of 1944 saw the Battle of the Bulge, the final big German offensive in the West. The German troops attained total tactical surprise and initial success. For a few days, there was even a chance of German armor piercing through to the Meuse River and dividing the Allied armies. Then American logistics reasserted itself, and with it, the 50 caliber machine gun. American troops hastened to the Ardennes with their usual load of ammunition and equipment. This entailed thought even improvised defense positions could unleash 50 caliber fire in appalling quantities against German attacks. The battle descended into precisely the type of attrition battle that favored American material advantage. Surrounded at Bas, American troops employed their 50 caliber machine guns to catastrophic impact on German infantry assaults. The guns functioned consistently in temperatures far below freezing, mud, snow, and the general confusion of protracted combat. German force made one fatal mistake in preparing the Bulge assault. They presumed that inclement weather would clip American air power and diminish the efficiency of American fire. Dominance, they were half correct. Weather did at first confine air actions, but German strategists had not explained the reality that ground-mounted 50 caliber machine guns were unaffected by weather, and that American logistics were able to maintain ammunition expenditure rates incomprehensible to the Germans. General Alfred Fallschirmtruppe commanded the 1st Parachute Army between November 1944 and March 1945 when he was wounded in Operation Veritable. The Canadian First Army's advance over the Rhine. Schlemm had the unpleasant job of protecting against Allied offensives using progressively dwindling resources and diminishing quality troops. His post-war prognosis, as with Bayerlein's, was the cumulative psychological effect of American firepower. Schlemm observed that German soldiers learned to identify the American 50 caliber sound at long ranges. By early 1945, the knowledge that any position might be covered by these weapons, that any movement might attract instant fire, and that the German troops had no adequate counter, formed what he termed a defensive mentality that rendered offensive action virtually impossible. His troops safely evacuated across the Rhine prior to the last Allied advance, but he blamed his casualties mainly on the relentless attrition produced by American heavy machine gun fire in the retreat. The technical characteristics of the M2 Browning account for its success. The weapon scaled 84 pounds without a tripod, 128 pounds with the M3 tripod mount. This made it heavy, but not too heavy for a crew-served weapon. The effective range of 1830 meant could target targets well beyond the range of German rifles and light machine guns. The rate of fire between 450 and 575 rounds per minute was less rapid than the German MG42, but increased rates of fire counted for little when German crews lacked ammunition. The 50 caliber Browning machine gun cartridge from the M2 had specifications that qualified it to engage a broad spectrum of targets. The M33 ball round, which was the standard, reached a muzzle velocity of 2,910 feet per s. Armor-piercing types penetrated 19 MUF armor at 500 meters. The M8 API armor-piercing incendiary round penetrated 16 millimeters at a range of 500 meters and would incinerate fuel or ammunition on penetration. The M20 API version with its tracer component penetrated 21 millimeters at the same range. This was to imply that even though the 50 caliber was unable to penetrate the frontal armor of a Panther or Tiger tank, it was able to penetrate the half armor, the armor cars, and the side and rear armor of most German armored vehicles. Most importantly, it could blow up truck engines, penetrate fuel tanks, knock out artillery pieces, and cut down infantry at ranges where return fire was meaningless. The reliability of the M2 was a result of its design. Development had been started by John Browning. In July 1917, in the First World War, M1921 water-cooled 50 caliber machine gun weighing 121 pounds with its water jacket came into use, but was found too heavy for mobile military use. The M2 air-cooled model adopted in 1933 removed the water cooling system and minimized weight while retaining reliability. The fundamental operating concepts of the weapon were straightforward, solid, and tried. American companies, such as AC Sparkplug, Frigid Air, Guide Lamp, and Colt, manufactured almost 2 million 50 caliber machine guns of all types. During the war years, manufacture of the M2HB, the heavy-barreled variant, which was capable of enduring longer durations of fire, totaled around 350,000 units total in all services and theaters. This level of production assured that American troops never had a shortage of replacement firearms or spare parts. The Germans realized intellectually what they were up against. Their own infantry weapons were, in many ways, more advanced. The MG34 and MG42 were more ideally suited for the function of squad automatic weapon. The German 13mm MG131 airframe machine gun had a greater rate of fire at 900 rounds per minute. German 30mm and 20mm aircraft cannons were more harmful per strike than any machine gun, but complicacy was irrelevant against mammoth material advantage. The Americans had designed a weapon that was adequate enough to perform every task that it had to perform, and had manufactured it in such quantities that enabled universal usage. Every American bomber carried 13 M2s. Each fighter, such as the P-47 Thunderbolt, carried 8 M2s. Each American combat vehicle carried at least one. American infantry companies had organic 50 caliber heavy machine gun sections. American anti-Unix could adapt their M16 quad mounts for ground use. The weapon was ubiquitous, always present, always stocked with plenty of ammunition, and it functioned every time it was used. The psychological effect on German units was cumulative and devastating. Individual soldiers could survive engagements with 50 caliber fire. Units could complete tactical assignments successfully in the face of American firepower supremacy. But with weeks and months of warfare, the pervasive awareness that the Americans could apply crushing fire to any target, on any given occasion with weapons that proved reliable under all conditions, worn down German combat efficiency, as surely as were losses in casualties and equipment. This was not cowardice on the part of German soldiers. These were experienced troops who had fought all over Europe and North Africa. They had many, in fact, been attacked by the Soviets on the Eastern Front. But there was something particularly demoralizing about the American way of warfare. The Soviets may throw human waves and artillery. The British may show tactical superiority and coordination. The Americans simply employed sheer material resources and shot until the opposition faltered. German officers found it hard to get men to advance when they knew that American 50 caliber firepower would await their advance. German troops were hesitant to move in daylight. German vehicles must behind cover instead of advancing. The initiative on the tactical level was forever taken away from the Germans, not due to better tactics or better training, but because American doctrine, based on the unlimited ammunition and trustworthy weapons, rendered German doctrine out of date. The animosity of German troops articulated for the 50 caliber was resentment of artisans confronted with mass production, of expert warriors confronted with industrial war. The 50 caliber symbolized all that about American warfare was foreign. To the Germans, the promiscuous use of ammunition, the dependency on material superiority in place of superior skill, the willingness to demolish rather than capture or go around, these were not tactics of troops in the conventional European sensibility. These were the practices of an industrial giant that had weighed and found material spending less costly than lives, and more efficient than tactical finesse. German military historians and retired officers, following the war, offered uniform appraisals. The American 50 caliber machine gun was not the most advanced weapon of World War II. It was not the quickest firing, or the most accurate, or the lightest, or the most versatile. It was merely the most effective because it combined reliability, ubiquity, and overwhelming logistical support. Thuipan itself was only part of the equation. The system that produced it by the millions supplied it with billions of rounds of ammunition, and employed it, according to doctrine that accepted material expenditure as the price of victory. That system beat Germany. The M2 Browning's legacy can be gauged by its ongoing service. 80 years since it went into production, the weapon is still in current use by the United States military and armed forces worldwide. It has outlasted every opposing World War II weapon system. It has been used in all American wars from World War II to the modern era. Such persistence is a testament to the inherent integrity of the design and the success of the American military concept it represents. The wider strategic meaning was only apparent in hindsight. German war planning had presumed that tactical superiority and better training could counteract American numerical superiority. Such an assumption proved to be a disastrous mistake. The 50 caliber machine gun showed that effective weapons manufactured in vast numbers and sent forth with limitless supply overwhelmed advanced weapons manufactured in small quantities and distributed in limited amounts. German tank officers who had overcome Soviet armor by better tactics could not maneuver against American combined arms units that featured several 50 caliber machine guns. German infantrymen who had learned the tactical finer points of the MG4 found their training useless when American troops could simply fill up defensive positions with continuous 50 caliber fire. German aviators who had learned to fly against the RAF found themselves torn apart by defensive fire from bomber formations that measured in terms of volume rather than precision. The lesson was universal and merciless. In industrial war, the side that can afford to spend more materials will win regardless of differences in tactical proficiency. The Germans had brought Craftsman's solution to a mass production war. They had optimized for effectiveness when the circumstances called for overwhelming numbers. They had retained ammunition when their enemies could spend it wantonly. What German troops Linetto, their bitter cost, was that 20th century industrial warfare penalizes not tactical genius or better training, but the ability to maintain overwhelming material expenditure. The M2 Browning 50 caliber marking gun became the emblem and tool of that lesson. German troops brought skill, doctrine, and resolve to the fight. American troops brought an industrial system with the ability to produce and provide heavy machine guns in numbers that made resistance mathematically hopeless. When those two methods of war clashed, the result was never really in question.